Welcome everybody to the Deconstructor of Fun podcast. I've got a great guest today, Carol Miu. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank Mishka. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
we've been chatting for a long time before actually starting to record. I really enjoy the pre-recording chats, but
Yeah, the warm
but
up.
yeah, the warm. I really enjoy the warm up, the stretch out, all that part. But I wanted to introduce you. Can I introduce you to the audience?
Of course. Thanks so much.
Uh, all right. So, Carol Miu, you were previously the CEO of People Fun. During your time as a CEO, the company scaled from 100 million in revenue to about 300 million in revenue with a very stable profit margin. Looking just at the revenue numbers, I would estimate the price of the company above 1 billion, but we're not talking about that. Uh, Before People Fun, you worked in products, director of product at Scopely. Before Scopely, you worked at Boss Fight, um, Dungeon Master,
Dungeon
Dungeon
Boss.
Hunter, Dungeon Boss. Yes,
Dungeon
the
Boss.
blog, the
It's
Roblox
on
looking.
Netflix now.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. What isn't? But yes, I remember that game. I remember an RPG with Roblox looking characters, right?
Yeah, and it was cute, like this little 3D RPG. We really like tried to make the characters lovable and very
Yeah.
distinct from each other. That was a fun project. I mean, as
Yes.
somebody who's been a fangirl of RPGs since 1985. So
It was a really good looking game. And before Bus Fight, you worked on the ad tech side of things. So you work at Ad Colony. And before Ad
yes.
Colony, you started off your gaming career at a startup called Evolver that was acquired by Ad Colony. And I believe you were doing data lead at Ad Colony, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I was chief data scientist at
Yeah,
Evolver, and when we got picked up by Ad Colony, Wonder of Wonders, they let me keep my title. So
yeah,
there were like
that's
the
awesome.
two of us.
Awesome.
And Bill Jackson, who was an investor at Evolver and of course founder at Boss Fight, spoke with me and then picked me up to be head of product on Dungeon Boss. So and the rest is history. But before that, I used to teach marketing at the college level. Before that, I was in litigation consulting for a decade. So I've really jumped all over the place. And I think it's
Yes.
safe to say I'll continue to jump all over the place for the rest of my career.
Yeah, yeah. And so currently, as a retired CEO, you're doing M&A consulting, advising, as every retired CEO is probably doing. You're traveling, another hobby of retired CEOs. And but something that is very unique about your retired life is you're learning physics, if I'm correct, right?
That's right. So, my personal life, I think, dictates a lot of my career choices. And when my dad got sick and subsequently passed of brain cancer, I really missed him. And he loved physics, but I used to hate physics. And I discovered after he passed that if I studied physics, I would get this warm, fuzzy feeling inside, like, oh, well, this brings me closer to my dad. Otherwise, he'd be out of reach. And so I actually decided to do it for real. And I've registered for classes at the University of Washington for a physics
That's
degree.
Yeah, so you've had a really interesting career. So with eminent with litigation consulting, marketing and social media teacher at a University of Dallas, then the whole gaming sector. What I wanted to really ask as a first question was, is it easier to be a female CEO than a male? Of course, you wouldn't know what it's like to be a male CEO, but what do you feel that it's being easier to be a female CEO, or is it tougher to be a female CEO? What's your perception?
I would guess that it's tougher because only a small percentage of CEOs are female. Want to make sure I get this right. I believe it's 2%. And
Hmm.
this is from a report by McKinsey. So it's tough because we don't have that network and that camaraderie, right? So if you are a male CEO, there are plenty of other male CEOs that you can talk to when you're trying to make a decision, handle a
Hmm.
situation. When you're a female, it's a little bit more disconnected. Maybe you don't know that many other female CEOs. Certainly, I made efforts to try to find more so that I would have a network I could talk to when I had any challenges and bounce ideas off of each other. Um, but more often than not, they were not present or not available in my network. And so I would have to reach out to some of my guy friends and ask, well, how would you handle this situation? Or how do
Yeah.
you see this situation? And I would say that as a female, first of all, I may see a situation a little bit differently.
Hmm.
Um, but in solving problems, I may choose a different solution that is either more suited to what I believe is right or allows me to lead with authenticity. So um, it might be distinctly different than a solution, a typical solution that your typical male CEO might choose. So I would say that it's harder on a bunch of different fronts, but representation is a big one, like having a network so it's not so lonely and you can bounce ideas off of others and try to make the best decisions.
I never thought about that, to be honest. Naturally, because again, I have guy CEOs everywhere, so it never even crossed my mind that that would be actually the case, and that's a really interesting point. Yeah, yeah, only 2%. That's
Yes.
tough, huh? And the advice from men would just be, you mentioned non-authentic, like it didn't feel like it would be the path that you would take. Like, is there a distinctive
It's
difference
just
or?
different than my personality. So I think that
Mm,
2% is actually like Asian female CEOs. So I think narrowing it down a little bit more,
yeah.
but like people like me that I would identify as like they're like me, they come from the same background as me, and something that like when I say something, there is trust and they can relate to me and they know
Mhm.
exactly what I'm talking about and what I'm feeling when I'm talking about it, right? Um, when it comes to like different responses and different authenticity, I think just by nature, communication styles tend to be different, right? And they're layered on top of that. If I'm super excited about something and I'm animated, sometimes people are like, well, why are you so angry? And I'm like, I'm not angry, I'm excited, right? Um, and so I think anytime we show above the baseline, like volume or energy, it can accidentally be misinterpreted just because there's so little representation. Like, have you had like hours and hours watching female CEOs talk and being able to map a style of communication to an emotion? Like, we don't have it. We don't, it's very new.
I would say also from my experience, especially working with Sophie, um, I noticed that there's just a different set of expectation that you have for a female lead, and it's a lot of the time it's based on looks. Like if you have a smaller stature and you're a woman, and especially if you have, like in Sophie's case, it's a lot about conscious leadership and so forth that she's very passionate about. Somehow people translated that she must be very soft as a leader, and and I don't. It's so weird. And then when that doesn't, like, it's not that she's hard. She's just a normal leader, and when those
Mhm.
those expectations don't come together, then it becomes this sort of a, I don't know, like misunderstanding and almost like a anti-reaction. Is like, she's not what I expected her to be, and I feel like that is the most unfair thing towards women leaders, is that there's this preconceived expectations of how they should be, how you should be acting, how you should sound, how you should behave, that is quite often unrealistic. And I don't think there would be similar type of expectation towards a male CEO.
I think a lot of that is by personality, but you're right that people are comparing against expectations all the time. That's our nature as
Hmm.
people. I would say that I have also seen with certain males that rise up to leadership who perhaps are more introverted, more technical, that the same expectations also apply to them, right? So there are preconceived notions about what type of leader you're going to be, how you'll communicate, the decisions that you'll make. And I don't like this categorization, but whether you'll be a weak leader or a strong leader, right? And I would like for people to just step outside of that and for them to work with their leaders, whoever they are, and um, try to grow the business, which is what we're all here to do, to learn, to grow the business. But
Yeah.
I do see a lot of what you're saying in the sense that if you are not the typical alpha leader that everyone is used to seeing on TV when they say, oh, it's the CEO of such and such a company, there are people don't know what to expect, right? So they kind of create this expectation in their own mind. And when you don't match up against, uh, you know, 99% of what's out there, and you don't match up against further the expectation that the person had for you, it can become difficult. It can create a lot of dissonance with their expectations.
Yeah, when you don't match against the PR of that person. Did you try, like, I'm curious about this. Did you try to change your behavior to match the expectations, or were you just hard on like, no, this is who I am, and I'm not gonna change based on the expectations of somebody else. My goal is to make a successful company and to keep growing as a company and not cater to a set of random expectations.
So I would say I was flexible on that point. Um, Prior to becoming CEO, I was head of product and head of studio at People Fun for 4 years. And
Mm,
so they already knew me and they knew me as a leader. And so they knew that I was on the tough side and I expected excellent performance and I expected their hearts to be in their work and to really be passionate about what we're building together. So they all knew that about me. But I think it was the opposite for me. They didn't know yet that I could also be soft and have like a full life. Like, um, I think they knew that I was nerdy and introverted, but they didn't know, hey, I socialize and I really care about my team. Like, of course, my product managers all knew that I really cared about the team, but I wasn't managing engineering, art, design at the time. It wasn't all my org, right? And so I think a lot of the dissonance was, well, here we have this person who we've known for 4 years and is a really tough product leader and um, demands and then works together with us to achieve these improvements. And I'm not shy about demanding improvements, right? And then as a CEO, it's a different story because, first of all, managing up is important. People Fund belongs to AppLovin, and those guys are great. It's been amazing working with their leadership team, and Adam especially just has been such a great mentor for me this whole time. But of course, there's a managing up aspect to it, and then there's a managing your org, and there it's hard, and a lot of times you're not supposed to, right? Um, let all information flow freely both ways, right? There is confidential information that can't be shared with employees about what a company may be trying to do strategically in the long run. Um, but likewise, there are issues and hiccups that you have at the studio, buggy releases, and you fix them and you fix them quickly. But of course, your management doesn't expect that you're going to run to them and report every single one, right? So, knowing what to communicate and how to communicate is really important. So, learning how to do that and do it in a very constructive, like positive way is important for a CEO to be able to do because everybody's morale depends on you, right? So, um, and it is really tough to figure out like what can be shared that improves morale and allows us to achieve our goals and improve the business, right? Like as a public company, financials are very important. All of our
yeah.
stakeholders, the board, everybody is very, very important. And we want to make sure that everybody is satisfied. But at the same time, there's a certain level of transparency in the decision making on decisions that haven't been made yet. That for those who don't understand the full context, it could upset them or it could spook them when really everything's going to be fine.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, this is a great point that you're making, and this has come up with so many different CEOs and so many different companies, whether they're startups or scale ups or others. The conversation that I've had is there are often, like quite often, situations where you as a CEO cannot share the full context. And I know we like to talk about transparency, which I don't like, because in practice you can't be transparent. You should be clear, but you just can't be transparent. There are things that are going on, negotiations, different types of deals, that you just can't tell legally to the rest of the team. And there are also situations where it doesn't make sense to talk about them, because they're in air. Something can happen, something can not go
mhm.
the right way. And kind of like raising false hope is also something that you shouldn't engage with. So a lot of the times I've seen the situation, kind of experience myself as well, is like we're almost having we're almost kind of like working outside the company while being inside the company. It's like there's so much external going on that you can't talk about, and it's kind of like a weird situation. And that in prior conversation before the recording, without any naming, like there has been situations where the CEOs had to focus so much on the external aspect, on some big deal that took months. And during that time,
Mhm.
the team felt that they were absent, that they're not interested anymore in what they're doing. And sometimes even the public PR was not, or the public word was kind of steering away, that the CEO is interested in other things, whereas in fact they were really working to get a very, very important deal done for the company. And
Right, like they
that's
care
kind of like
so much about the long
yes,
term. That's what they were
exactly.
investing in. Yes.
Exactly. And when I see these things and I know what's really happening, it's so unfair. I'll give another, like a more concrete example. There was the company that had a they launched a pretty big game, like we're talking about double A, triple A, and that didn't really succeed. And so they had to either raise additional funding, which is difficult in current scenario, or sell the company or go into a co-development. And the leadership was really working hard on all these three options. And at the same time, the company was very transparent, and they were showing how much money they have on their bank account and so forth. And what happened was that the employees saw the money going out, they saw the game not succeeding, and they felt that the leadership team wasn't acting, when in fact they were working day and night to get these deals done. And they started losing people because they felt that the company was going
Mhm.
bankrupt. And there was a lot of word on the street of like, this company, the leadership is not working correctly, like our game is down, nothing is happening, we're losing money. And again, I have the information through common investors and so forth, when I know what's happening. And it was just so sad to see this. And that kind of led me to this point of like, transparency doesn't work, clarity works, transparency doesn't, because they were so transparent that it was detrimental to the company.
Right. And it's like coming full circle to where we started. It's about managing expectations, right? So
Yeah,
it's like maybe I can't be completely transparent with you, but I'm going to try to manage your expectations so that you are expecting the right thing.
yeah,
But a lot of times that transparency is detrimental. It can spook people. It can actually give them the wrong expectation if they don't know how to interpret the information, right? And all of that can hurt the company rather than help the company grow, uh,
yeah.
in the example you just mentioned.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of turn this into a more positive, because it's unfair to talk about the CEO's role as just a negative thing, because there's so many positive things. You're at the midst of all the decision making. Your perspective of the whole business and the business environment and the market and the investment side and the boards is just totally different. Like the vantage point is fantastic, and there's the compensation elements and all these things. Like it's a high risk, high reward type of a job. So I wanted to ask you is like, what were some of the memorable successes or any achievements during your tenure as CEO that you think fond about?
Mhm. Well, certainly, like in my time as head of product and CEO, People Fund was a rocket ship. It grew fantastically. Um, One of the things that we had to learn that I'm actually very proud of us learning is how to fail the right way and to fail quickly, right? So there's no such thing as you start an idea and you just keep at it and you continue to sink money into it for years and years and it doesn't become anything. Um, we learn to fail the right way by checking all of our KPIs, like giving ourselves appropriate time frames. So for all of this to happen, all of the different disciplines at the studio need to be balanced and they need to be working together well. And you need to know when to call it so you're not wasting money, right? So you're investing in the right things. And um, another thing that we really learned was, well, how do we create games for the available addressable markets that are out there, right? Like, where is their demand? And that's very different than the old way of doing things, which is somebody has a passion project. Like, since I was 13 years old, I always wanted to make this type of game. And so I'm going to go ahead and take my studio and sink like $10 million a year in making it, even though nobody wants this game but 13-year-old me, right? So, um, making sure that doesn't happen is actually a really important thing. I would dare say that in the industry, we still see that happening in many, many places where they're not checking to make sure that there's high market demand for the product that they're making, right? So being able to have the right balance between, like, this has to be profitable because the profitability of this game is what's going to ensure the longevity of the studio, right? This is how we're going to be around in 10 years because our games are profitable. But we're not going to sacrifice on creativity, right? Creating that balance is important. Like, you see a lot of studios out there cloning other studios' games. Like, nobody's that successful. Like, maybe you make enough to get by, but nobody really talks about them, and it's nothing big, and the lack of creativity hampers them, right?
Mm.
You can't just copy other people's stuff and expect to become wildly successful and, have a company as successful as People Fun. That's impossible. But what you can do is, well, what are the best elements of these games, and does everything fit together to be something that the market highly demands, right? So, can we tweak things? Can we improve things? Can we take a different angle on a design? Can we change the mechanics a bit? And can we do it better and then steal market share, right? So that's definitely possible. But as CEO, you're thinking about all these things all the time. Like, what's the right balance? I would say that something that comes up a lot that your listeners might find useful is a lot of times when you're the CEO, you don't want to engage too much in a debate because suddenly you'll find everyone just sides with you, right? So you want to let the debate unfold in front of you and nudge a little bit and think about it and then come back with a decision later. But what I found in a lot of situations, not just as CEO, but even prior as head of product, is that you have a debate and it's got like 10 to 15 people in it, and they immediately choose either end of the spectrum. Like, um, there's
Mm.
only two answers and only one of them is correct, right? And so a lot of the value that a leader can bring, not just a CEO, but any leader, is to enter that debate and say, well, it's not just these two, polar opposite, like dichotomous solutions to the problem. You actually have a whole spectrum of solutions you could choose from. But our job is to figure out which one is the optimum, right? So while you're debating two different solutions that are as different could be, at opposite ends, your best solution is actually right here. Here's the
Hmm.
optimum, right? And
Were there
that's a lot that a leader can bring to the conversation because a lot of times those debates do devolve.
were there ever situations where you felt that the decision making was going towards the wrong direction, or even the decision made was wrong? And as a CEO, in the end, you are still responsible. And kind of like what I'm trying to understand is like,
Mhm.
how did you find the balance between the creativity and the product mindset? Uh, because let's be honest, like a team that is passionate about what they're doing tends to do better products, assuming that they
Mhm.
have the correct product strategy that sets the guardrails of what they should be doing and how they should be doing that. So I'm just curious, like, how did you steer away from something that you felt wrong direction? Like, how did you do that as a
It
CEO?
depends on the cost, right? So if it is a high cost mistake, I would go in, and after the decision was made by the team, they would need my buy-in, and I would go in and explain kind of like narrative storytelling, like gather around, like let's listen to the stories of how what you've just decided to do has gone wrong every single time it's ever been attempted, right? And generally, that would get them to reconsider and come back to me in a few days with a different approach that had better upside and less cost. So it depends on the mistake, right? In a more costly mistake, you want to prevent it before you're sinking the cost. It's going to
Hmm.
take a lot of money. It's going to waste a lot of money. Um, Different kinds of mistakes. If a mistake is like very low cost in terms of time and money, maybe you let them make it, because if you're ruling with an iron fist and you're not letting people try new things or make mistakes, you're going to burn away the trust, right? And you can't burn away the trust. And also, you have to have that curiosity in you. We've not tried this before. I also want to know how it's going to turn out. And it's
Yeah.
not costly. We could fail and nothing super bad happens. So let's go do it and let's go take a look at the data. And there's that scientific wonder about it too. But I would say, like, in terms of choosing, right? Like, um, you take a look at the data. You want to be data informed. If people who've tried this approach have, by and large, failed every single time and have sunk tens of millions of dollars in it, you probably don't want to do it the same way. But if it's a lower cost mistake and you really want to teach someone something and how to fail properly, then you go ahead and you let them do it, and they'll come back to you and say, "Oh yeah, it turns out it was a mistake." You don't even have to say anything.
Yeah, that's the tough one. The balance between the iron fist and total laissez-faire life, where you can do whatever you want, just keep prototyping for 5 years, and something good will eventually come out. That's a tough one, and like my, I can't say that I was able to find the perfect medium. I think I've gone through both of the sides. I've been an iron fist type of a person, is like, I know what we should be doing and this is the right way, only to learn that not the best way, and going like all the way to the other side,
Mm.
where I'm just here to support and the team can, can find the perfect solution. I think that's not the best way either. It's like, as you said, it has to be a very clear rules for the decision making. I think the storytelling part is good, because in the end, you as a CEO
Mm.
take the responsibility of that investment. And so it's really important for the team to understand also your role. It's not your role as being right. It's your role is to be responsible of these things that are being made. And that's why getting your buy-in is absolutely crucial to move the product forward. So yeah, probably
Yeah,
a
and
lot
I,
into
I
that.
would say my role in being wrong is also important,
Hmm.
right? Because serving as the example, having a CEO who can admit when they made the wrong decision, when they made mistakes, is really important, because what we really want to have is a studio where everyone feels psychologically safe and they can be really candid with other people, right? Like, constructive feedback isn't resisted. Um, People don't have confirmation bias, right? Like, it's human nature to have all of these things, right? So if you're consistently working towards a really healthy work environment in which you can give constructive feedback and people aren't like defensive about it, where
Hmm.
you have to set the example where if nobody is criticizing you and the way you're handling things, you have to come out and say, like, oh, well, I decided this and look at the result. It actually turned out not well. So that was the wrong decision. Or to come in and say, like, oh, well, during that conversation, I might have been a little bit too quick to make a judgment, or even to excuse yourself in the heat of the moment when someone is talking and you're debating, and you just say, I'm sorry, I just interrupted you in the middle of a sentence. It helps, right? It helps everyone understand what the desired behaviors are and that nobody is above them.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Kind of like zooming out and really talking about your career as a whole, in games. How have you seen this industry evolve, and what kind of like the major trends and shift you've observed and that really influenced and influenced your career and were either very positive or less positive during that time?
Yeah, I would say that my time in gaming on the whole has been very, very positive. It's been amazing, like going into gaming in 2014 and really watching mobile take off and be a part of that, all the way up until now, where we're really seeing this like cross-platform, but also cross-pollination, where a lot of PC and console games are saying to themselves, "Well, we wish we could monetize like mobile. Let's figure out that piece of it." So I would say that things are getting tougher. Like whenever an industry matures, right, it becomes tougher and tougher to have a successful business. There's a lot of saturation, there's a lot of competition. Layer the current economy on top of that, and the competition is very, very tough right now. And I would say that I've learned so much, not just about running gaming studios, but just how to be a good manager in all of the balanced ways, right? There's so many competing goals that you have where you're trying to drive the results for the business, you're managing the team, you're trying to keep morale high, you're trying to skill people up. And I've just had so many friends along the way who have taught me so much on that front. So, um, you know, sometimes with my personality, I when I'm training people and they seem to have stalled in their growth, right? I really struggle with like, how do I knock them out of this stasis and keep them growing if that's what they really want in the first place, right? And so I've had a lot of help on that front just from like outside friends giving me pep talks or ideas of things to try. And, Will Brinkman from Scopely is one of them. Like when I come to him and I'm like, okay, so I have somebody in product, or I have somebody in marketing, or I have somebody in engineering, and they're junior to mid level. And I'm trying to like imbue in them like the joy, the passion of having this job and being able to work in gaming, and to make the most of it. But it seems like they're stuck in this place. He'll give me lots of ideas of things to say and things to try, and be like, have them try to work on this so that they can see like, the good, the bad, and ugly. And then do they come away with a different impression? Like, does that light the fire? Right. So, really, it's all of that joy and saying, well, is this um, all a mystery, and there's all this mysterious box, and there's all these different locks on it. And as I become friends with different people, different leaders in the industry, and as I also gain experience in product, in management, working on my technical skills as well in
Hmm.
programming, does this give me more and more keys so I can unlock more of the locks on this mysterious box and like finally open it and get to see what's inside? And as you're taking the layers of the locks off of this box, there's just been, you know, so many amazing learnings from the early days at Evolver, trying to come up with turnkey VIP and mission achievements solutions for mobile games. Like the thinking was in the right place, right? Um, but executing that and trying to execute that as part of Ad Colony perhaps was not the right combination. And then moving on to Boss Fight, where we were just first learning about what players wanted to engage with and monetize in, like what will they buy and at what price, and um, do we do gotcha boxes, and how do we do them so that players are still happy? Do we do a subscription? In those early days to working on The Walking Dead Road to Survival at Scopely, which was a different animal
Hmm.
because we had the Scopely, the publisher, in LA, and then Aigo, the developer, up in Vancouver. And so there were all sorts of communications challenges and a long history and changes in leadership. And can I get 100 people to work together really, really well from two different locations and be really, really happy about it? And this is in the pre-COVID days when really, when you were working in gaming, we didn't do remote back then, right? And
Yeah.
we didn't do that many distributed teams back then. It's a whole different world now, right? And then managing a studio during COVID and watching that transform, uh, hiring all over the world. We've got, just amazing talent all over the world. And being able to actually hire from anywhere is special. And I'm glad that we're at this point now in the industry.
So, that's actually leads to an interesting topic. Do you think that remote work is positive, negative, or is it a necessary evil? Like, how do you see remote work as a whole?
I see it as a strong positive, right? Because it gives us the flexibility to work from where we want, and to manage our outside of work lives, which are, very much our lives,
Hmm.
right? And to approach the balance that we think is best. And for the companies, your best employees will put in extra time when you allow them to work remote, because all that time that they would have spent commuting or trying to figure out how to deal with childcare, they're investing it right back into their work, right? And your best performers who are really, really passionate about the work will always find ways to contribute more to their work.
Mm.
So
How about the effect on just building a team culture, values? Like talking to a lot of investors, um, in the beginning, like remote work was not the beginning. A couple of years ago, remote work was totally fine. But now, talking to a lot of investors, they're saying if you're a new team, you have to be in the same location or spend at least a few days a week in the same location so you can start building those relationships and gelling together as a team, and that you shouldn't start remote off the bat.
I would say that more training is necessary for managers and teams to develop team cohesion and to know how to do it remotely. Um, I remember back in the days before COVID, people were debating whether we should allow remote work, and the general consensus was like, well, you learn so much from just eavesdropping or chilling with somebody in the lunchroom or bumping into them at the water cooler, and you can't do that remotely. So we don't like remote work. But as someone who managed distributed teams over Slack for many years, even before COVID, I know that it works as long as you know how to manage the teams and how to invest, right? Um, in training people how to work remotely. So I'm a firm believer that it can work.
Okay, I'm in the middle. I'm definitely like my point is more on the hybrid. I've seen too many challenges. Like there are far and few studios that I see that are good at remote work, and most studios that I've seen and witnessed myself are challenged by fully remote work, and they're actually working better in a more of a hybrid um, situation where there
Mhm.
is face to face time during the week. But if everybody's fully remote, it's been quite challenging. And then you're absolutely right when you mentioned that the top performers were able to put more, but also what you would find is top performers are putting more than they can actually handle in a fully remote setup. So they're working even too much, and that causes a lot of
Mhm.
issues. And then the low performers are working even less, and so there's kind of like a like a weird separation between the two, that I've personally seen. Again, these are just my anecdotal experiences and discussions with other founders.
Well, I 100% agree with what you just said, right? But certainly as CEO, there is some leeway to handle the situation with low performers, certainly.
Yeah.
And just found in my prior experience that if you're investing in getting people to gel remotely and then you bring them together 4 times a year, so like once a quarter, uh, 4 out of 52 weeks, like everything works really, really well, like surprisingly well. But I think a lot of managers who are accustomed to managing the old way, it's almost like being floor supervisor, like a foreman at a factory. Like they don't know how to manage remotely. They think that good management is like being able to see everything your employees are doing, but it's not.
Mm. Yeah. There's different leaders for different situations. I would say this is not a black and white sort of a thing to me. It's like, as you mentioned in the
Yeah,
debates, you can be on the both sides, but the truth is all tends to be in the
somewhere
middle.
in the middle,
So
for sure.
so that's kind of how would I see this. Um, so kind of like, when you look back at your career in games, is there something that you wished you had done differently?
Uh, Wished I had done differently. I mean, I go through so much of that like every day with everything that I do, right? It's in my nature to always question myself and revisit decisions and be like, well, what if? What if I did things differently? Um, I would say that early on in the days of People Fun, with the success of Wordscapes, we grew the staff a little bit too fast and needed more of a strategic plan for long-term growth. So I was still a bit early on at the company then. So if I had to do things differently, I think I would have pushed a bit harder at that point for um, when you go from 1 to 10, it's very different than going from 10 to 100, and like scaling with mindfulness and making sure that the structure is appropriate, because now you have a lead and the lead's got to do their job and they've got to train 5 new people. How's that ever going to work, right? So I wish that I had been a little bit um, more vocal about that and gotten my hands a bit dirtier in planning at that stage. I would say that I wish that at some point I had, this is a silly one, that I had an opportunity to work for Nintendo. That never
Mhm.
materialized, but I've been a Nintendo fangirl since 1985, and, had the Power Glove and the trackpad and everything else uh, up to Wii U. And I was a national finalist at the 2010 Nintendo Wii games. So super into that. Went to Nintendo Live in Seattle a few weeks ago. So I'd say one of my regrets is not having worked at Nintendo in the 10 years that I devoted to gaming. But every 10 years, I tend to change my career. So going to attempt to be an astrophysicist next.
Yeah, and talking about that, like you change your career attempt, and it's not like it's changing towards something easier. Like you're not. I don't know if being a barista is easier, but I would assume might be a little bit easier than
It's
being a
hard.
CEO. It's hard. It could be hard. I mean, if you like coffee a lot, then like it depends. But it seems like you're going to difficult quests all the time. And I wanted to kind of ask you is like how how do you maintain a work life balance, especially as a CEO and leading a game company? Like what kind of a I'm sure that the work life balance wasn't always there, and so how were you able to find that, or were you able even to find that during your tenure as a CEO?
In all honesty, I was terrible at that. And that's one of the reasons I left, right? So I'm a workaholic, not in a good way. Like, I think work really helps me focus on something productive. Otherwise, I'm all over the place, right? I'm like a very high functioning ADHD. And so, otherwise, I'm just bouncing off the walls and I'm all over the place. Work really focuses me, and it's something that I could sit there and do for like 18 hours straight or 21
Hmm.
hours straight, much to the detriment of everything else in my life. So I would say that I don't think I really found that balance, and I think that my choice in leaving is an attempt to try to find that balance for myself. Like when I was joking around with Tony Goodman and John Boog Scott, and I said like I think I worked 12 years in the last 5 years, and John was like, I don't doubt it, but like don't be in a rush to finish the astrophysics degree either. Like to take something slowly for once. And when I was running the numbers, my son, he's 5 years old now, he just started school. I had spent fewer than half of his days with him because I was working so much. And even of the days that I was physically in the same house with him, I was glued to the computer. And um, I can do better than that, right? Like, I really think that your life should be in service to the people that you care about. And to be able to strike the right balance there is really important to me. But selfishly, I wasn't able to do that before because it's just so much easier for me to just zoom into the computer for 18 hours and be super productive and be like, yeah, whatever I just did just made tons of money. Even meanwhile, there are other things that arguably should be more important in my life. And um, when I said that a lot of my career choices are governed by what's happening in my personal life, like these wake up calls, I think really have saved me. right about the time that I decided to retire at People Fund,
Hmm.
I was feeling a bunch of different things, like diminishing returns, having been there for 5 years. And I found John Lee, who is the new CEO, and I was like, I really think that within a year, this guy can do my job better than I can. So let's go do that. And I'm going to spend more time with my children. My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer at exactly the same time. So it was definitely like a wake up call. I would say that delegating your job as CEO is like the ultimate delegation. But for the different stages of the company and what the company needs, like I made a lot of changes really quickly in my year as CEO in terms of restructuring teams, and, I'm firmly of the belief that when the studio is profitable and you have like high performers, and they're passionate about their work, um, you never let anyone go. There's no need to. You could always put them on a different project, right? But it's a different story when people are starting to run out of their passion, or you need them to operate on a particular level that requires a lot of skills training, and um, there's some difficulty with them in acquiring those skills, or um, there could be a variety of different reasons where their particular skills, they could be highly skilled at what they're specializing in, but that's not what your game needs right
Hmm.
now, right? So there are a lot of different scenarios, unfortunately, but um, certainly, I would say like passionate, high performing people, you do what you can to keep them, right, and keep them happy, keep them working on what makes them passionate and generating results for the business. But for me, when I was evaluating myself, I felt like, oh, well, I feel like I'm hitting diminishing returns at 5 years. Like we grew the revenues of the business like trifold in the time that I was there. Um, feel good being like the 10 to 100 person, but there's a lot of stuff that I neglected in those 5 years. And so at some point, that calling comes and you have to make that switch. And
Do you
that's like,
feel, yeah, do you feel that there's a bigger expectation, or that you put a bigger expectation towards yourself as a mother, versus if you would have been, versus what a man would put on himself, like as a CEO? Because you could kind of say that I'm a breadwinner, I need to do this. It's kind of more okay to just be, you know, um, at work a lot if you're a dad, compared to a mom.
I think it's a really personal decision in this day and age. Like, um, we're making strides towards equality.
Yeah.
The way you view yourself, though, of course, is always a tricky thing. And with all the love in the world to my mother, who is battling stage 4 cancer right now, she had no choice. My father, who was a very loving father, had some issues that prevented him from being able to work. So here's my poor mother for 30 years as not only the breadwinner, but the single earner in a family with 3 children in New York, of all places, right? So she was away from home all the time. And like, if I could even, recount to you how much I missed her when she was gone,
Mm,
and then to turn around and realize I was doing it to my own children. So I would say that for me, it wasn't governed by any preconceived notion of like gender norms or what society expects of me, but very personally from my own childhood and the change I wanted to make.
I totally understand that. Yeah, I'm,
But
I'm
she
just,
had
I'm
no
just,
choice. I have a choice.
yeah.
So like, I'm not blaming her. She is great.
I'm, I'm asking because like I see my wife. She's also an executive at a tech company, and having two kids and so forth. I can see the two sides, and I can see the challenges of working hard, long days, evening calls, a worldwide organization, and then at the same time, like, at some points there comes this counter reaction where she's like, I need to be with my kids, and everything else can wait, and so forth. So I don't know if this is gender norms or if other things, but definitely I can see it. I can see it in her. as well. And
Mhm.
I have this, I have the similar things, but now I can balance my days much easier.
Yes, and I feel that way now too. In fact, I signed up to be my kids' art teacher at their school because they don't have a dedicated art teacher, and now I have the time
That's
to do
great.
that now. So, um, but for me, I think I was so much a workaholic, right? That switch that was supposed to turn on at night, that's like, now it's time for
Hmm.
me to spend time with my family. It didn't turn on, right? So, um, I really needed to be more mindful and like make a stricter decision about all of that.
Mm, I understand. Um, all right. The last one is advice for the future generations or the future leaders, not necessarily generation, aspiring leaders, entrepreneurs, anybody looking to get into the gaming industry or who is already in the gaming industry but who's looking to get into those leadership positions. Like, what kind of advice would you have? And then again, like we've talked a lot about the challenges of being a CEO, but it's a net positive of a job, even in a
Oh, for
case of a
sure.
fail. In a case of a failure, which happens a lot in a CEO's position, you're still moving forward. You're still learning at an incredible velocity, and the vantage point that I was talking about is unrivaled. Like you arrive on a whole different level. You see the market in a whole differently. You understand, the investments, the boards, that part of the business that is very crucial, as crucial
Yeah,
as
and
the
it's
game
like
development
dizzying,
itself.
right?
Yes,
It's like you have the
it,
electron microscope and you're like, "Whoa," right? Like
yeah,
there's the moon, and then you have so you have your electron telescope and you have your electron microscope and you're just like, "What the heck is going on here?" Like,
exactly,
um,
exactly. It's just a net.
so
It's
it's
next
dizzying.
level in many ways, and so there are challenges, there are failures, high risk, high
Most
reward,
people don't
but
even get the opportunity to try it once,
yes,
right? So,
exactly,
I,
exactly.
I would say it's definitely special and definitely positive. Like my advice is keep things small for a long time, right? Like work in, that 1 to 10 phase with the most skilled people, your most trusted people for as long as you can before you need to scale to reach that next level of success. I've seen a lot of issues at orgs where they really scale too fast, and without minding well the structure, who's going to manage whom, who's going to work on skills training for the juniors. All of this needs to be planned and it needs to be in place. I would say also, like, try new things and fail often. Like, um, successful startup CEOs don't just have like one idea and stick with it forever. Like, they might be failing for 5 to 10 years with thousands of ideas before they come up with the idea that's a hit that makes them, multi millions, or more. So, I would say patience is important when it comes to dealing with other people and being, a mentor and a manager. Always be authentic to yourself, but realize that, like, um, really, there's more than one version of events. There's more than one reality because, and this is also the physicist in me
Mhm.
speaking. You have um, really all of these different viewpoints and all of these situations that people see contextually. So, what's really real? Is it the way you saw it, or is it the way that I saw it? Right. And to keep an open mind and keep those communication lines open, because you might see a situation one way and think that everyone agrees with you, and these are just the facts. But when you get people to trust you and open up, you actually understand that they all interpreted the situation differently and they also all interpreted your reaction differently.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. Again, something that I've been talking about and kind of listening up to lately is we is that every time you experience certain thing, it's your side of the story, and every time you
Mhm.
hear somebody else telling you something that is a subjective thing, it's their side of the story, and that's also a challenging in the job of a leader is like not to cling on to these sides of the story, but understand the whole picture and always seeking
Right.
the other side of the story. And if you want to become a leader in any industry, in games industry especially, which is pretty small, it's like you have to be also careful with sharing your side of the story. If you're sharing it from the perspective as like this is the truth, because you
There's
know,
very little that's objective, right? Almost
exactly.
anything is subjective.
Yeah. So I for example, whenever I talk about to other or give feedback, I always say, hey, this is how I see it. I know it could be totally different, but from my perspective, even now, I give today advice to my to a friend of mine who's a CEO, and he got upset, and I'm like, sorry, I did really didn't mean that. This is like my side of the things, how I see it. You can accept or reject the feedback. We're still boys. I love you. Like like listen, but but you know. we we had a conversation about engine. It wasn't that serious, but but engine choices.
It's
But
like
even
switch engines
yeah
or not. That's like a really big conversation
yeah
right now. And,
yeah
yeah, people will make their own decisions about it either way.
exactly.
But yeah, I definitely get what you mean because it you know, I would say that this advice is for all levels. Like, be really, really open to constructive feedback
Hmm.
because it's human nature when we start hearing a criticism of ourselves and our work, right? To be very, very hurt, maybe to be defensive, right? And I would say that that's a natural response. But the response that indicates like growth mindset that's really going to get you
Hmm.
places in your career is when you're a good listener and like let people say their piece and realize they can say their piece. That's their interpretation. You take that back and try to, your job is to try to distill that into the most constructive action possible and work on yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think oftentimes, and in our pre discussion, we touched upon this, a lot of times in the workplace now, people don't handle it well when you say something that hurts their feelings, like if the work did not meet expectations, or they need to learn a skill faster, or the way that they handled a debate did not allow voices to be heard. When you bring this to them and you're kind of hoping that they're going to really think about it, right, and change their behavior so that everybody could be like um, a more cohesive team, so
Hmm.
touching upon that topic as well, and also more productive as a team. um, it can be hard because what they hear at first is just like, you don't like me and you just want to complain about me. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to complain about you, right? Which is the least constructive response possible. But I think still it happens because people misunderstand why you're giving them the feedback. And also, they've not been previously trained on how to handle feedback.
Yeah, yeah. It's you know, it's a challenging thing to lead people, but I think in the end, like what has worked in my case, I think it will work with other cases. I'm sure people do this. Is like have a close group who know you both as a person and as a professional, and use them as mirrors. You will be getting different types of feedback, and a lot of most of the feedback is subjective, and so it's very important to go to the people who you trust and ask them, "Hey, is this true? Am I really like this?" And those are the people, the trusted ones, that will tell you whether that's true or not. Because you can also overcorrect based on all the feedback you're getting. And the more you move into leadership position, the more you feel the need to please people. But fact is, you can't please everybody, and you shouldn't be pleasing everybody. It's
Yeah,
important that
definitely.
majority is happy with you, but they're always going to be, you know, as my army captain always said, 20% of the people in your platoon will hate you no matter what you do. And that's, but the 80% is the key. Like when you reach that 80%, you're doing great. Never go for 100. And so that's kind of important to keep in mind. Again, those are just what an army captain would say, but it's good to keep in your mind when you feel that you're not clicking with somebody and it's not working. You'll be like, okay, that person's not that
But
20%, it's not going to work, but the 80%, that's the most important part.
yeah. And like you find that trying to please the 20%, you lose your authenticity, but you
Huh.
also lose your effectiveness as a leader if you're trying to please
Yes.
everybody. It's impossible. But also coming full circle, when you talk about that tight knit group of close leaders that you trust to really give you feedback and tell you if you have egg on your face or broccoli stuck between your
Mhm.
teeth, it can be. harder for certain demographies on that front too. So I would say different genders, uh, different races, different religions. Because if you're looking for that trusted group of advisors at your org, there may not be anyone in that group who matches your demography. So
Mm,
that can be a little bit tricky as well, right? So um, it's interesting, and I think
yeah.
to think
I
about like, okay, well, who do I treat as self? And there is trust, and you can trust anybody, right, from any background. But is there enough understanding of my experience that they can actually like understand how I feel in
yeah.
a given situation?
Yeah, you just have to have people who have been close to you for a longer time. So I think that that kind of, you know, um, is the way to get out of that. But yeah, you're
Yeah, or
absolutely
it's
right.
like if the same stuff hasn't happened to them, right? There's that little meme where it's like,
Yeah.
the eagle family is like, I don't understand why the mouse family is so afraid of Mr. Hawk. Like, you have no idea what they're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's more like the mirror group is more like when you get feedback, you bring that feedback to them is like about yourself, and you bring it to them and say, "Hey, is this valid? Like, how could I improve on this if this is valid?" And they will give you a good perspective on things. So not perhaps on like other cases, but I definitely have people who I confide in and talk about the feedback that I've been giving, and they help me to course correct or just even say this is actually not how I see it. I've worked with you. You're not like this. So I'm like, okay, cool, thank you. so so
Yeah, I mean, the best for me on that front, I think, bar none, has been John Book
yeah,
Scott. Like, he always just
yeah,
tells me the way it is, and
yeah,
uh, he's always very even keel, very balanced. And it's like, well, other people may be seeing this, or um, you might be very excited, but people don't know how to interpret your excitement. Or he might say, like, oh, well, they meant that as constructive feedback. So next time, listen all the way through before, like, trying to refute any of the statements. Like, get the whole message first. Like,
yeah.
he's been incredibly helpful to me, like, throughout the entire time at People Fund before he retired.
All
Now
right,
we're both
Carol.
retired.
Yeah, well, for a while, you're gonna be back in Space Force anytime now. So, CEO of Space
Hopefully. Yeah,
Force.
give me
Yeah,
5 years.
yeah. Well, we talked a lot about a lot of things. We talked about different sides of a story. So we talked about clarity and transparency. Um, we talked about everything. We talked about having a starting your career and then how you should stay as long of a time in that smaller mode before moving to a larger. We talked about how it's important not to scale too fast because there's so many mistakes that can happen there. And most importantly, we talked about the job of a CEO. Um, let's not kid ourselves. It's an excellent and fantastic job that not everybody, but people shouldn't be afraid to strive for if they want to strive for that job. And it's a high risk, high reward. Chances are you're going to retire in 1 year or quit. But
It's a
nevertheless,
rare opportunity, but you should
yeah,
go for it. Bottom line.
exactly, exactly. It's a mountaintop that if you want to get there, just go for it. And it's going to be hard, but everything that is good in life is usually hard to achieve. And it's what can I say? It's a good experience. so
Yeah, and you'll
so
learn the most from that
yeah,
experience. Like, I
yeah,
think all life is about learning, and
yeah.
yeah, the job definitely taught me a lot.
Exactly. So thank you, Carol, so much for taking time off your retired life to talk about being a CEO in the game industry. And I know you're not going to continue in the game industry full time, still advising, still consulting, still helping out friends in the industry. But I think you'll be moving to a more other type of interesting adventures in your life after this phase.
Yes, and thanks so much, Mishka, for inviting me and speaking with me, and looking forward to this next phase of my evolution.
All right. Thanks to everybody for listening, and you can connect with Carol on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're on Deconstructor Fun Slack channel, but if you want to get there, You can be there. There's about 2,000 something people now, all senior
I'm
professionals. So
I'm on it, but it's been months
yeah,
since I've logged on to
it's
Slack.
been months. Exactly. You shouldn't be logging
I'm
in.
retired.
Retired people don't log in on Slack. So if you want to connect with Carol, just connect through LinkedIn. She probably checks that a little bit more often, and you're probably open for some advising, some consulting. But we talked in pre-recording that you're trying to even limit that one as well, just to get more
Yeah,
time
just
back.
reaching good balance, more time to myself.
Yeah, yeah. But any questions to Carol? And thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Carol, so much for sharing.
Thank you, Mishka. Appreciate you.